There is a real sense of urgency building around the Dallas Cowboys right now, especially as the draft conversation starts heating up and new information keeps surfacing. And when you look at everything that has unfolded recently, it feels like this is one of those moments where a single decision could shift the direction of the franchise in a big way. The spotlight today is firmly on a name that has sparked debate, curiosity, and a fair bit of uncertainty across the league. Because after such a long absence from competitive football, seeing him finally step back into the spotlight brought a mix of excitement and questions that simply cannot be ignored. What stood out immediately was how he handled the physical testing. After more than a year away from real game action, there's always going to be skepticism about whether he could still move the same way, whether that explosiveness would still be there, or if the injury had taken something away from his game. But from what was shown, especially in those straight-line drills, there were clear signs that the raw athleticism hasn't disappeared. The burst looked natural, the speed was evident, and the ability to generate power in his jumps suggested that, at the very least, the foundation of his game is still intact. And that's where things start to get really interesting. Because when you're evaluating a player in this situation, it's not just about whether he can run fast in a straight line or jump high in a controlled environment. It's about projecting how all of that translates back onto the field, especially in a league where every small limitation gets exposed quickly. The flashes we saw were encouraging, no doubt about that, but they also left a gap in the evaluation. There's still that missing piece when it comes to lateral movement, change of direction, and how comfortable he looks when reacting rather than simply executing a planned drill. That uncertainty is what's fueling the debate right now. On one side, you have the argument that talent like this doesn't come around often, and when you see a player who has already proven himself at a high level before the injury, you take that gamble. You trust the upside, you believe in the recovery, and you invest in what he can become rather than focusing too much on what you haven't seen recently. On the other side, there's the reality that the Cowboys are not in a position where they can afford a miss. Every pick at the top of the draft has to contribute, and there's very little room for a player who might need time to fully get back to 100%. That's where the timeline becomes such a crucial part of this conversation. When you go back and look at how everything unfolded, from the injury to the reports of a possible return, and then ultimately the decision not to come back during the season, it creates a layer of mystery that teams are going to dig into deeply. Was it purely precautionary? Was there a setback that wasn't widely reported? Or is it simply a matter of timing and long-term planning? These are the kinds of questions that don't always get clear answers, but they absolutely influence how front offices approach a player like this. And for Dallas specifically, the stakes feel even higher. This is a team that has made it clear through its recent decisions and overall roster construction that immediate impact matters. There's an expectation that whoever comes in, especially at a premium draft position, needs to step onto the field and contribute right away. That philosophy doesn't leave much room for uncertainty, and it certainly complicates the evaluation of a player whose current condition, while promising, still isn't fully proven in a real game setting. At the same time, you can't ignore what he showed the last time he was fully healthy and playing at high level. The tape from that stretch was incredibly impressive, filled with moments where his instincts, physical tools, and overall presence made a noticeable difference. It's that version of the player that keeps him firmly in the conversation, because if a team believes that level can be reached again, then suddenly the risk starts to look a lot more manageable. But this is where the draft process becomes a balancing act. Teams are constantly weighing potential against certainty, upside against reliability, and in this case, it feels like one of the more delicate evaluations in this entire class. The performance in workouts helped, there's no denying that, but it didn't completely erase the concerns. Instead, it shifted the conversation from doubt about whether he belongs in the discussion to a deeper debate about just how high he should go and which team is willing to take that leap. For the Cowboys, the decision could come down to how confident they feel after getting closer access to him. Medical evaluations, in-person meetings, and a deeper understanding of his recovery process will likely play a massive role in shaping their final stance. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about what he did in a controlled environment or what he showed on tape over a year ago. It's about projecting forward and deciding whether he can be a reliable piece for a team that needs results now, not later. And that's why this situation continues to evolve with every new piece of information that comes out. The testing numbers sparked optimism, the limited footage created intrigue, and the unanswered questions keep the debate alive. As teams finalize their boards and narrow down their options, this is exactly the type of scenario that can shake things up in ways people don't expect, especially when a player with this kind of talent is sitting right on the edge between being a safe pick and a calculated risk. The more the situation develops, the more it feels like the Cowboys are standing at a crossroads that could define not just this draft, but the direction of the defense for the next several seasons. Because when you look at their current roster, there are talented players, there are solid contributors, but what they really need is someone who can step in and become a difference maker. Not just a rotational piece, not just depth, but someone who can line up on Sundays and change the way opposing offenses plan their games. And that is exactly why this entire conversation keeps coming back to whether taking a calculated risk is worth it when the potential reward is so high. One of the most interesting parts of this entire evaluation is how much of it now depends on information that the public will never fully see. Fans see testing numbers, short clips from workouts, and old game film, but teams are gathering medical reports, conducting interviews, and trying to understand the mentality of the player after such a long recovery process. They want to know how confident he is in his body, how disciplined he was during rehab, and whether he still has that competitive edge after being away from real competition for so long. Those details matter more than any 40-time or vertical jump because they help determine whether a player is ready to return to a demanding professional environment. Another factor that cannot be ignored is how the rest of the draft board might fall. Sometimes a team does not just draft based on one player alone, but rather on how the entire board unfolds in front of them. If several offensive players go early, it could push defensive talent down. If another team takes a corner earlier than expected, that could change the entire strategy. Draft night is always unpredictable, and players like this often become the center of attention because they can either rise quickly or slide, depending on how comfortable teams feel with the risk involved. There is also the psychological side of this conversation, which is something people do not always talk about enough. When a player suffers a major injury and then spends months working to come back, there is always a mental hurdle as well as a physical one. The first time he lines up across from a receiver at full speed, the first time he has to cut and react without thinking about his knee, those are moments that cannot be fully simulated in workouts. Teams have to believe not only that he is physically ready, but that he is mentally ready to trust his body again and play without hesitation. For the Cowboys, this becomes even more important because of the expectations surrounding the team every single season. This is not a franchise that operates quietly or develops players slowly without pressure. Every move is analyzed, every draft pick is debated, and every season begins with the expectation of competing at a high level. That environment can be difficult for a player who is still working his way back to full confidence, which is why the front office has to be absolutely certain about their evaluation before making a decision at such an important spot in the draft. At the same time, there is always that argument that the biggest rewards in the draft often come from teams that are willing to trust their evaluations and take a chance when others hesitate. If the Cowboys believe that he can return to the level he showed before the injury, then passing on that talent could end up being something they regret for years. Draft history is full of examples where teams avoided risk and watched another franchise benefit from a player they were too cautious to select. The timing of his recovery and the way he performed in testing at least reopened the door to this entire possibility. A few months ago, many people assumed he might fall out of the top part of the draft simply because there was too much uncertainty. Now, after showing that the athleticism is still there and that he is further along in his recovery than some expected, the conversation has completely changed. Instead of asking whether he should be drafted early, people are now debating exactly how early he might go and which team will ultimately make that decision. And this is where strategy becomes just as important as evaluation. Teams have to think not only about whether they want the player, but also about whether they believe he will still be available later. If the Cowboys think another team, picking shortly after them, is interested, They might feel pressure to make the move earlier than they originally planned. If they believe he might slide a few spots, they could consider other options first and hope he is still there. These are the kinds of decisions that make the draft so unpredictable and so fascinating every single year. What makes this entire situation even more intriguing is that there does not seem to be a clear consensus. Some evaluators see a top-level talent who simply needs time to get back into rhythm, while others see a risky pick for a team that needs immediate contributors. When there is no clear agreement, it often means the final decision will come down to which team believes the most strongly in its own scouting process and medical evaluations. As the draft gets closer, more rumors will appear, more reports will surface, and the picture will slowly become clearer. But until the moment the pick is announced, there will always be uncertainty surrounding a player in this situation. And sometimes that uncertainty is exactly what makes a draft class so memorable, because one decision can change the trajectory of multiple teams at the same time, depending on how it turns out in the years that follow. As the conversations continue behind the scenes, what really matters now is how teams rank risk versus immediate impact. The Cowboys are in a position where they cannot afford too many long-term projects, especially at premium draft positions. They need players who can step onto the field and contribute early, and that reality will heavily influence their final decision. Even if the talent level is undeniable, availability and readiness often outweigh potential when a team believes it is close to competing at a high level. That is why every medical report, every private meeting, and every evaluation detail becomes incredibly important in the final weeks before the draft. Another element that could influence this situation is how the defensive board looks overall. If multiple defensive players begin to come off the board earlier than expected, it could create pressure to act quickly rather than risk missing out on a top-tier talent. On the other hand, if the board starts to fall in a favorable way, the Cowboys might find themselves with multiple strong options available, which would make the decision even more complicated. There is also the question of team philosophy and how much value they place on upside compared to reliability. Some organizations are known for betting on elite traits and trusting their coaching staff to develop players and manage recovery situations. Others prefer safer selections, players with fewer question marks who might not have the same ceiling but offer more immediate stability. The Cowboys in recent years have shown moments of both approaches, which makes this particular decision even harder to predict because it depends on which philosophy they prioritize this time. But before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Your support helps us keep bringing you the latest updates on the Dallas Cowboys. Feel free to share your thoughts on the news in the comments as well. Could the NFL be witnessing one of the most surprising comebacks of the decade? Rumors are swirling around the league that Jerry Jones, ever the bold and unpredictable owner of the Dallas Cowboys, has quietly opened discussions to bring back veteran defensive stalwart Calais Campbell. Sources close to the organization suggest that Jones, known for his penchant for headline-grabbing moves, is seriously considering adding the seasoned pass rusher to a roster that has shown flashes but lacks consistent veteran presence on the defensive line. Campbell, who has long been admired for his leadership, relentless work ethic, and ability to dominate both the run and pass game, would bring an instant jolt of experience to a Cowboys front that has been searching for stability. While the 36-year-old's name has floated around free agency circles and whispers, the idea of a return under Jones' watchful eye seems almost cinematic, an NFL legend coming back to prove the doubters wrong. Those close to the player hint that Campbell is intrigued by the possibility, not only for the chance to compete at a high level again, but also to mentor a younger wave of defensive talent hungry for guidance. Inside sources say the talks are in very early stages, and no formal contract discussions have been confirmed. Still, the very notion has ignited social media, with fans imagining a revitalized defensive line anchored by Campbell's imposing presence. Analysts are speculating on how such a move could alter defensive schemes, imagining a veteran force capable of collapsing pockets, drawing double teams, and mentoring emerging stars in the trenches. The intrigue is heightened by Jones' reputation for making unexpected, headline-worthy acquisitions, and insiders believe he sees Campbell not just as a player, but as a symbolic figure capable of elevating locker room culture. While skeptics point to Campbell's age and recent injury history, proponents argue that his intelligence, conditioning, and football acumen make him more than capable of producing at a high level even in the later stages of his career. The idea of a seasoned veteran joining a talented but untested Cowboys defense paints an enticing picture, a blend of youth, speed, and the kind of wisdom that can change the trajectory of a team's season. Whether the talks will lead to a signed deal or remain mere speculation, one thing is certain. Jerry Jones has once again managed to spark the imagination of fans and pundits alike. The NFL landscape may not yet be ready for what could be one of the most captivating returns in recent memory, but the whispers are growing louder, and every report seems to add fuel to the fire. Could Calais Campbell don the Cowboys star once more? For now, it remains tantalizingly uncertain, leaving fans dreaming of a defensive revival that could redefine expectations and perhaps, just perhaps, usher in a new chapter for both player and franchise. That's it for this update. If you enjoyed the video and want to keep receiving exclusive news about the Dallas Cowboys, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. We always look forward to your comments and opinions. See you in the next video.